Across 3 centuries, Europe was set on fire by ideas about God, power, freedom, and who should rule a nation. What began as whispers in church pews and village squares exploded into wars of faith, kingdoms collapsing, empires rising, scientists challenging the heavens, philosophers reshaping government, and revolutions spreading from Paris to Port-au-Prince to the Americas. This is the entire age of revolutions for world history too, Standard 4, told as one connected story, from the wars of religion to the 30 Years' War, from the scientific revolution to the Enlightenment, from absolutist kings to rebellions that toppled them, and the revolutions that reshaped the modern world. One standard, one journey, many stories. This is Histoscript, where standards become stories.
Imagine a small village somewhere in France. The year is 1570. The sun has gone down. Darkness has fallen like a heavy blanket. Only light from dancing flames, long, spooky shadows on rough stone walls. They are afraid of their neighbors. A new idea about God has arrived. It has split their world in two. This fear was a constant companion across 16th century Europe. A time of immense change. One book, the Bible, was making kingdoms tremble. What began in whispers would become a fire that set Europe ablaze. In the middle of the 16th century, France was a kingdom deeply and dangerously divided. On one side stood the Catholics, the majority of the population. They were loyal to the traditional church. But now new thinkers appeared. John Calvin in France. Read the Bible for yourself, in your own language. Faith as a personal connection to God, not controlled by priests and popes. The way you prayed decided who you were. It decided friend or enemy. Tension grew day by day, month by month. Queen Mother Catherine de' Medici tried to keep the peace, a master of politics, playing sides to find compromise. But hatred ran too deep. Violence exploded again and again, small massacres, skirmishes, full-blown battles. Armies formed, led by rival nobles. 40 years of brutal civil wars left a trail of destruction and death. In August 1572, it seemed like peace might finally have a chance. A grand wedding was planned in Paris, the bride, a Catholic princess, the groom Henry of Navarre, a Protestant prince. Thousands of Huguenot nobles and their followers flocked to the capital to celebrate. Then an assassin tried to kill Admiral Coligny. He was wounded but survived. The Huguenots were outraged. The royal court was in panic. In the early hours of August 24th, a signal was given, the ringing of a church bell. This was the start of a coordinated slaughter. Royal guards dragged Admiral Coligny from his bed and killed him. Catholic mobs, incited by radical preachers and a lust for blood, began hunting down Huguenots. They killed men, women, and children without mercy. The streets of Paris literally ran red with blood. The killing continued in Paris for 3 days and spread to other cities across France. No one knows exactly how many people died. Estimates range from thousands to many more. The French wars of religion would rage on, more viciously than ever. But France was not alone in turmoil across the Rhine. German peasants were also inspired by new ideas. Let's travel now to a different place, the German lands of the Holy Roman Empire in the 1520s. For the common person, life was incredibly hard. Imagine waking before sunrise to work the land every single day. Your home is a simple hut, perhaps shared with your animals. Your clothes are rough. Your food is basic, mostly bread and porridge. A drought, a flood, a hailstorm could mean starvation for your family. The peasants did not own the land they worked. It belonged to a nobleman, a prince, a bishop. They had to give large shares of grain, vegetables, livestock, and work on the Lord's land for free. Into this world of simmering resentment came the new ideas of Martin Luther. His message that all believers were equal and that Scripture was the authority was electrifying. Peasants listened to preachers who promised freedom and justice. Peasants gathered in armed bands. Scythes, flails, and pitchforks became weapons. They drew up a manifesto, the 12 Articles, combining social fairness with the language of the gospel. The demands were surprisingly moderate: choose your pastor, end the worst forms of serfdom, restore commons. They sent a copy to Martin Luther, hoping for his blessing. At first, Luther sympathized with the peasants' complaints. Their calls for fair treatment and an end to harsh feudal burdens resonated with his message that all believers were equal before God. But as their movement grew violent, burning monasteries, attacking nobles, threatening social order, his attitude shifted. Luther feared chaos more than injustice. He believed God had placed rulers in authority and that rebellion against them would bring disaster. In a furious pamphlet, he urged the princes to crush the uprising without mercy. For the peasants, this was a devastating betrayal. For Luther, it was a choice to preserve stability, even at the cost of siding with the powerful. The princes mustered professional armies, cannons, cavalry, disciplined infantry. The peasants were courageous but ill-equipped and poorly organized. What followed were massacres, not battles. The lords crushed hope with overwhelming force. At Frankenhausen, the peasant army, led by Thomas Müntzer, was annihilated. Thousands were slaughtered, villages burned, fields salted. Captured leaders were tortured and executed as warnings. The defeat was total. Around 100,000 peasants were killed. Their situation became worse than before. The lords clamped down, stripping away rights. The dream of biblical justice died. Luther's reputation was stained. Many felt betrayed. Hope had been crushed under the heel of an iron boot. The German Peasants' War became a brutal lesson in the cost of challenging the established order. When we look back at these terrible wars of faith, we are left with a powerful and unsettling feeling. We have their letters, their decrees, their pamphlets. But what about the Huguenot family hiding in their Parisian cellar? Their diaries, letters home, their individual voices are mostly lost to us. We have the 12 Articles, a precious glimpse, but not the private hopes and fears. History is often told through the powerful, the winners who could record their thoughts. Thinking about these missing voices changes how we see the past. It forces us to read between the lines and imagine lives that were silenced. These conflicts leave a question that is still relevant today. Whose voices are we hearing, and whose are missing? Whose version of faith becomes law? The king, the preacher, the individual? The struggle to live together when we believe different things continues to echo through our world. These struggles over faith and power were not isolated events. They were part of the revolutions that transformed Europe between 15 and 1800s, shaping kingdoms, communities, and everyday lives. Every standard has a story. This was the Age of Revolutions, Standard 4A.
Began with men hurled from a window in Prague, would end with Europe itself thrown into a new order. For 30 long years, kingdoms bled, villages burned, and millions perished. This is the 30 Years' War, a conflict born of faith but consumed by power. The story begins in Bohemia. In 1618, tensions boiled over. Ferdinand II, a zealous Catholic, demanded uniformity. The Protestant nobles of Bohemia answer with defiance and violence. The Defenestration of Prague, a single act of rebellion, lights the fuse.
Prague, 1618. A city divided by faith and power. For decades, Protestants and Catholics lived uneasily under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor. Promises of religious freedom were crumbling, and tempers flared. The new emperor, Ferdinand II, a devout Catholic, sought strict uniformity of religion. For the Protestants of Bohemia, this was a betrayal. Their rights, once guaranteed, now lay in ruins. On May 23rd, the Protestant nobles stormed Prague Castle. In the council chamber, they confronted two imperial governors, Jaroslav Martinic and Wilhelm Slavata, along with their secretary, Philip Fabricius. Accusations flew. Words turned to threats. Then came action. Seized by force, the Catholic governors were dragged to the windows of the castle. And then, defiance turned to violence. The men fell nearly 70 feet. Miraculously, they survived. Catholics would claim they were saved by angels. Protestants sneered it was a dung heap that broke their fall. What seemed like a local act of fury lit the fuse for a continent-wide conflict. The defenestration of Prague was no mere brawl. It was the spark that ignited the 30 Years' War. One act of rebellion, one fall from a window, plunged Europe into 3 decades of war, destruction, and suffering.
Imagine the visuals: angry nobles hurling officials from towering windows, church bells ringing as Europe braces for conflict. Officially, it was about religion, Catholics versus Protestants. But beneath the surface, it was about power, territory, and survival. German princes, Swedish kings, Spanish Habsburgs, and even Catholic France all jumped in. Allies shifted constantly. Today's friend could be tomorrow's enemy. And in Bohemia, the rebellion was swiftly crushed by Habsburg power.
They call me the Winter King. For one brief season I wore the crown of Bohemia. At White Mountain Ferdinand crushed us. My reign like the snow melted away.
God favors the faithful, Bohemia bows, and the Catholic order stands eternal.
Danish phase. King Christian IV of Denmark tried to protect the Protestants, but his armies were crushed by the ruthless General Wallenstein.
My army pays for itself. We take what we need: grain, gold, or lives. Mercy is weakness. Fear will feed us.
His ruthless methods broke Denmark's armies, but his ambition frightened even Ferdinand. Dismissed, recalled, and distrusted, Wallenstein's loyalty was as uncertain as the war itself. From the north came salvation for Protestants: Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, the Lion of the North. With mobile cannon and brilliant tactics, he turned the tide until his death in battle.
My cannons are swift, my soldiers disciplined. Far go for freedom. Germany shall not fall to tyranny.
At Lutzen, the Titans clashed. Gustavus fell in battle, but his army triumphed. A victory shadowed by tragedy. French phase. Catholic France shocked Europe by joining the Protestant side. Religion gave way to pure politics. Religion was no longer the war's heart. Power was. And the greatest twist of all, Catholic France siding with Protestant enemies, simply to weaken the Habsburgs.
Yes, I am a servant of the Church, but France must come first. Better a divided empire than a united one under Habsburg rule. Balance, not unity, will preserve Europe.
French troops marched to join Swedes. The war drags on. Longer, bloodier. Villages torched, armies living off the land, stealing food, spreading famine and plague. Civilians suffered the most. Germany's population dropped by 20–30%.
We do not care for emperors or kings. We care for bread. Yet armies take it, plague steals it, famine finishes the rest. They say a third of Germany is gone. I say it feels like more.
In 1648, exhausted and broken, Europe made peace. The Peace of Westphalia redrew the map. Princes could choose their religion, states were sovereign, beyond outside meddling. The Holy Roman Empire's dream of unity was finished. France rose, Spain faded, and a new system was born, one that still shapes the world today. The 30 Years' War, a tragedy of faith, turned into a struggle for power, leaving Europe scarred, but transformed. From the ashes rose the modern state. But for those who lived it, there was no glory, only survival. If you want more stories of history's greatest turning points, subscribe to Histoscript, where every standard has a story, and we bring it to life. Today, we're diving into the dramatic stories of the Dutch Revolt and the Tudor Rebellion's moments when courage, faith, and a bit of rebellion really shook up history. Are you ready? Back in the late 14 to 1600s, Europe was a mess. New religious ideas from the Reformation were clashing with old loyalties to kings and popes. Monarchs kept raising taxes to pay for wars, and everyday people pushed back when their way of life was threatened. Two big examples of this unrest: the Dutch Revolt against Spain and the Tudor rebellions in England. What began in 1568 as a desperate uprising against Spanish power grew into an 80-year struggle for freedom, culminating in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia and the birth of a new Dutch nation. But what really set off this whole rebellion in the first place? Philip II, Spain's Catholic king, tried to root out Protestantism in the Netherlands through the Inquisition. Instead of obedience, he provoked outrage, especially among the Calvinists. On top of religious pressure, crushing Spanish taxes weighed heavily on Dutch merchants and farmers, turning daily life into a struggle. The Netherlands is a land of dikes and fields wrestled back from the sea. That struggle against nature gave the Dutch a fierce sense of independence. In 1566, tensions finally boiled over. Calvinist mobs erupted in what became known as the iconoclastic fury, smashing statues, tearing down images of saints, and stripping churches bare. To Spain's Catholic king, Philip II, this wasn't just vandalism, it was open defiance. His response would be swift and brutal. Catholic Spain struck back with fury. The Duke of Alba marched in with an army and unleashed the dreaded Council of Blood, determined to root out Protestant resistance. Thousands were executed. But the Dutch were clever. They used geography to their advantage and opened the dikes and deliberately flooded low-lying land, making it impossible for Spanish troops to advance. The rebellion also gained strength from the Sea Beggars, Dutch guerrilla fighters who targeted Spanish ships and raided ports. undermining Spain's control of the seas. This fight dragged on for decades. The Dutch got help from Protestant England, and later, France. Bit by bit, they wore Spain down. Finally, in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia made the Dutch Republic officially independent. It was a huge deal, and the map of Europe was forever changed. So, why does this matter? Geography wasn't just land, it became a tool for fighting back. The revolt showed how religion and national pride could come together and create a whole new identity. In the end, the Dutch Republic turned into a rich, tolerant trading powerhouse. Like the Dutch Revolt and countless other uprisings across Europe, the Tudor rebellions were not isolated. They were part of a larger age of resistance, when ordinary people challenged the power of kings, queens, and empires. Life in Tudor England wasn't exactly peaceful. There were all kinds of uprisings, some about religion, others about money or politics. No matter the reason, they all showed just how much tension was bubbling under the crown. Let's first check out the Pilgrimage of Grace, back in 1536. With the Act of Supremacy, Henry VIII had split from the Catholic Church and shut down the monasteries to grab their riches. Can you imagine the uproar? Up in northern England, thousands of Catholics hit the streets, marching under the banner of the 5 Wounds of Christ. They weren't going to let it slide. The rebels wanted the monasteries restored and the new taxes abolished. At first, Henry offered forgiveness, but his mercy was a trap. The rebel leaders were executed, and the monasteries remained closed forever. Fast forward 13 years to 1549, fields were empty, harvests failed, and regular folks struggled just to get by. Then came big economic changes. Nobles fenced off common land, shutting out the peasants and leaving them desperate for survival. That's when Robert Kett stepped up in Norfolk. He led tens of thousands of peasants, all demanding fair rents and an end to those enclosures. The government responded with force, crushing the uprising. Robert Kett was hanged, and hundreds of rebels were executed in the aftermath. At the time of Kett's rebellion, England was ruled by the boy king, Edward VI, just 11 years old. It fell to John Dudley, an adult power behind the throne, to march on Norfolk and crush the revolt. Yet even as the rebellion was squashed, it proved a larger truth that resistance, even when defeated, can echo louder than obedience. But the story didn't end there. 6 years after Kett's defeat, rebellion rose once more, this time in the form of Wyatt's rebellion. People panicked when Mary I, a Catholic queen, said she'd marry Philip of Spain. Was England about to fall back under Catholic rule and foreign control? Sir Thomas Wyatt led his rebels in a bold march on London, desperate to block Queen Mary's marriage to Philip of Spain. To them, it wasn't just a wedding, it was the fear that England would be dragged under foreign rule, its crown controlled by a Catholic king from overseas. The rebellion didn't work out, but it proved just how tangled up religion and politics really were. What did all this mean for the Tudors? The Tudor monarchs were tough on rebels, no doubt, but every uprising showed that royal power had its limits. When people's faith, land, or sense of identity was threatened, they were ready to risk it all. Let's break down the OPCVL analysis together. First up, the Dutch Revolt. Where did these sources come from? A lot of it was Dutch propaganda showing the rebels as heroes fighting for freedom. The main goal? To get everyone on board against Spanish rule. These were written right in the middle of a tough religious war. What's cool is they really highlight how a Dutch national identity started to form. But here's the catch. Spanish sources saw the rebels as outlaws and troublemakers. So if you were there, which side do you think you'd be on? Now, let's talk about the Tudor rebellions. From royal decrees to rebel manifestos and eyewitness accounts, documents from the time reveal the battle of words as much as swords. Some writings urged people to rise, others defended the crown. But remember, every voice had its own spin. Rebels painted monarchs as tyrants, while rulers cast rebels as dangerous threats. Remember, OPCVL isn't just for history. The Tudor rebellions show how sources carried bias, and the same is true today. Headlines, posts, and stories in your daily life are always framed with a purpose. Use OPCVL to question them, and you'll see the difference between fact and spin. All across Europe, people learned something important. Loyalty to the crown or church was never set in stone. When rulers pushed too hard demanding more taxes, land, or strict religious rules, ordinary folks stood up and said, enough. They pushed back, sometimes at great risk, but always with hope for a better future. The Dutch ended up building a brand new republic, while England's rebellions were put down, but both left their mark. In the end, these uprisings changed nations and proved that sometimes resistance speaks louder than obedience. It's a reminder for all of us. When faced with unfair rule, it's not just our right, but our responsibility to stand up for what's right. Thanks for joining me on this journey through history.
Can you imagine living in the United States if the governor of your state could choose the religion of every citizen? If the governor was Baptist, so were you. If the governor was Catholic, you were too. And if you didn't like it, your only real option was to move. Luckily, here in the US, the First Amendment protects us from that. No state and no governor can establish an official religion. But about 400 years ago, in the heart of Europe, something very similar was the law of the land. In 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia ended the bloody 30 Years' War and reshaped the map of Germany, which at the time was a patchwork of hundreds of small states inside the Holy Roman Empire. Under the treaty's principle of cuius regio, eius religio, Latin for whose realm, his religion, the ruler of each state got to decide the official faith of their territory. It was like a medieval version of states' rights, but for religion. One prince might enforce Lutheranism, the next ruler over, strictly Catholic. Another might embrace Calvinism. Ordinary people didn't get a vote. If you disagreed with your ruler's religion, your best choice was to pack your things and move to a territory that matched your beliefs. The system didn't create modern religious freedom, far from it, but it did stop the massive wars between Catholics and Protestants that had torn Europe apart for decades. It was a compromise, one that valued peace between states over the freedom of the individual. If your state's governor could set your religion today, how would your life change? Would this system create more unity or more division in the US? Imagine a world where religion isn't just a private matter, but a weapon in the hands of kings, armies, and empires. The Reformation didn't sweep across Europe on a single tide. For 30 years, Europe bled over faith and power. In Germany, it set off a powder keg of rebellion. In England, it became law. And in France, it nearly tore the country apart. Then came the Treaty of Westphalia, a treaty that shattered the Pope's authority, freed hundreds of German states, and rewrote the rules of international law. Let's dive into how this revolution shattered old Europe and changed everything. When Martin Luther challenged the might of the Catholic Church, the reaction was explosive. Northern German princes had been chafing under the Pope's thumb for ages. Now, they saw their chance, not just to reform faith, but to seize power. They converted to Protestantism, kicked out papal influence, and ran their territories on their own terms. But not everyone was on board. The mighty Habsburgs, rulers of the Holy Roman Empire, clung fiercely to Catholic unity. This split tore the empire apart. What followed was decades of brutal religious wars, climaxing in the 30 Years' War, a conflict so devastating it left cities in ashes and fields empty. Signed in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia ended the 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that had ravaged Central Europe, especially the Holy Roman Empire. But this wasn't just a peace deal. It rewrote the rules of diplomacy, religion, and sovereignty in Europe. Let's break it down. Sovereignty over religion. Rulers were once again given the right to choose the religion of their state: Catholic, Lutheran, or now Calvinist. This added Calvinism to the list for the first time. It didn't bring total religious freedom, but it ended the idea of a single Catholic Europe, rise of state sovereignty. Westphalia marked a turning point in international law. It recognized the full independence of hundreds of small German states from the Holy Roman Emperor. From now on, states could make their own foreign policies, the start of the modern nation-state system, birth of modern diplomacy. The peace was negotiated over 5 years with delegates from across Europe. This was one of the first times international diplomacy looked like what we know today: neutral venues, ambassadors, and written treaties. It set a precedent. Wars should end through negotiation, not just domination. End of religious wars in Europe. While religion remained important, future wars would be more about politics than faith. The treaty helped separate church and state, a shift towards secular governance. New balance of power. Big winners: France and Sweden, who gained territory and influence. Big losers: the Habsburgs of Spain and Austria, whose dream of a united Catholic empire died with this treaty. The Treaty of Westphalia didn't just end a war. It reshaped Europe. It gave birth to the idea of sovereign states, boosted modern diplomacy, and weakened the grip of religious authority on politics. A treaty forged in blood, but one that laid the groundwork for the modern world. Meanwhile, over in England, the story took a sharp turn. Here, the Reformation was a royal affair. King Henry VIII wanted a divorce, and when the Pope refused, Henry broke away, birthing the Church of England. But it was Elizabeth I who solidified this new identity. She blended Protestant beliefs with old Catholic rituals, crafting a national church that brought stability. With the church's power fading, a new force began to rise: economic ambition. People invested, traded, and built fortunes no longer tied to the old ways. The Reformation in England didn't just transform faith, it helped spark the rise of capitalism. And then there's France, a kingdom already on edge. Protestant Huguenots demanded freedom, and for a moment, they got it thanks to the Edict of Nantes, which allowed them to worship openly. But peace was fleeting. The edict was revoked, and persecution returned. As Central Europe burned in the 30 Years' War, Cardinal Richelieu, a Catholic mastermind, made a stunning move. He aligned Catholic France against the Catholic Habsburgs, not for faith, but for power. Suddenly, religion wasn't the only game in town. Politics was now just as deadly. So, what's left after the dust settles? The Reformation broke the Pope's grip, fueled fierce wars, and gave kings new power. It helped birth capitalism, nationalism, and the politics we know today. Europe's old order was shattered, and the world would never be the same.
For centuries, European knowledge rested on the authority of ancient Greeks and church doctrine. The earth stood still. But in the 16th century, whispers of a new universe began to stir, led by Nicholas Copernicus. He mathematically proposed a heliocentric model, a sun-centered universe. Copernicus was terrified of the upheaval his ideas would cause. He hesitated for decades, aware of the immense backlash.
Nicholas, this is madness. To suggest the earth moves, that it is not the center of all creation? The Church, the very foundations of our understanding, will not tolerate it. They will see it as heresy. Keep your on the revolutions to yourself, my friend.
To shield his revolutionary work, Copernicus eventually dedicated it to the highest spiritual authority, Pope Paul III. This dedication was not a gesture of devotion, but a preemptive defense against the coming storm.
I may well presume, Most Holy Father, that certain people, as soon as they hear that in this book I ascribe movement to the earthly globe, will cry out that holding such views, I should at once be hissed off the stage. Therefore I debated with myself for a long time whether to publish the volume.
Copernicus is said to have received the first printed copy of De Revolutionibus on his deathbed, brought to him by a devoted friend who made sure his life's work reached the world. But the seeds were sown. A century later, Galileo Galilei not only embraced Copernicus's theory, but actively championed it as physical truth. His improved telescope provided the undeniable, observable proof.
To deny what my own eyes and instruments reveal, merely because it contradicts ancient texts. The book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. The truths of the heavens are unveiled through observation, not decree. The earth does move.
Galileo's insistence that the earth moved directly challenged the authority of the Church. In 1633, he was summoned to Rome to stand trial before the Inquisition, accused of heresy and forced to renounce his belief that the earth revolved around the sun. Before the tribunal, he was compelled to sign a statement declaring,
I, Galileo Galilei, being in my 70th year, kneel before your eminences. I abjure, curse, and detest the error and heresy of the motion of the earth.
He signs the recantation, saving his life from the Inquisition's sentence. Yet as the story goes, when he rose and turned away, the old scientist murmured softly under his breath,
Eppur si muove.
And yet it moves. He was sentenced to life under house arrest. He was silenced, his work banned, but the scientific facts could no longer be contained. While Galileo faced persecution for what he observed, René Descartes provided the new philosophical foundation for how to think. His ability to pursue his revolutionary ideas in solitude was often achieved while working in bed, a routine financed by his family inheritance and investments.
In my quiet solitude, warmed by my stove, I resolved to reject as absolutely false everything in which I could imagine the least ground of doubt. And then I noticed that it was necessary that I, who was thinking, was something. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. From that single, certain truth, all knowledge can be rebuilt by pure reason.
Descartes established human reason as the unshakable foundation for all knowledge.
The ultimate synthesis came with Isaac Newton. Building on the observations of Galileo and the mathematical rigor of Descartes, Newton unveiled the universe's grand design.
I have applied myself to discover the quantity and properties of this force which we call gravity, and have seen that it is universal, extending its reach to all the celestial bodies. The cosmos is not chaos, it operates not by miracles but by fixed, measurable laws. And these laws are mathematical. The moon and the apple obey the same rule.
The moon and the apple obey the same rule. Newton's universal gravitation proved that the heavens and earth were governed by identical forces. Newton described the entire universe as a vast, predictable machine, a grand clockwork of motion and law, understandable through mathematics. But to Newton, this perfection was no accident. Behind every orbit and equation, he saw the hand of the divine. God, he believed, was the great clockmaker, the master engineer who set the cosmos in motion and ensured its harmony. The scientific revolution, despite fierce resistance from institutional dogma, fundamentally changed the European worldview forever. It replaced a world of divine mystery with a world of mechanical order. It taught Europeans that the most reliable source of truth was not ancient authority or religious decree, but their own reason and empirical investigation. This confidence in the human mind was the spark that ignited the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution was never just about the stars or equations. It was about courage. The courage to question, to doubt, to seek truth wherever evidence led. Back then, questioning authority could mean exile or death. Today, the dangers are different. Cancel culture, ideological backlash, digital isolation. Yet the principle endures. Progress begins when we dare to think for ourselves. Today, everyone has an opinion, but few stop to ask, how do we know what's true? We scroll, we share, we argue. But 300 years ago, a few dared to question not just what they believed, but why, and changed everything. They challenged kings, questioned the church, and rewired the way people saw truth, power, and even God. They called it the Enlightenment, the moment when reason, not authority, became the brightest light in Europe. Before the Enlightenment, Europe was a continent in pieces. Civil wars, plagues, and revolts left cities in ruin and faith in question. From the ashes of that chaos, one man tried to explain it, not with faith, but with fear. Thomas Hobbes believed human nature was brutal, selfish, and cruel. Without authority, he wrote, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
To escape anarchy, men must surrender their freedom to a sovereign power strong enough to keep the peace.
Hobbes imagined society as a pact. People give up liberty for order, and in return, the ruler keeps chaos at bay. His vision was dark, a necessary dictatorship born of fear. But one generation later, another thinker would ask, what if government could be built not on fear, but on freedom? John Locke was a quiet revolutionary, a scholar on the run. In a world where kings ruled by divine right, he dared to imagine government built on reason and consent. In exile, he wrote 2 treatises of government, not for monarchs, but for mankind.
Every man is born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Governments exist to protect them, not to destroy them.
He never fired a shot, but his words would spark revolutions centuries later. Charles de Montesquieu was a nobleman who mistrusted nobles. He dissected governments like a scientist, searching for the anatomy of freedom.
In England, power is divided. King, parliament, courts, each limiting the other. Perhaps liberty lives not in strength, but in balance.
That discovery became his masterpiece, The Spirit of the Laws.
Power must check power. When all authority rests in one man's hands, liberty is lost.
His idea of separation of powers would echo from Versailles to Philadelphia. France was a land where words could be crimes. When Voltaire praised tolerance and free thought, his books were burned, and he fled for his life. In exile, he discovered something radical, a nation where people could disagree without dying for it. For Voltaire, the measure of enlightenment was not agreement, but tolerance, the ability to let ideas clash without silencing them. His biographer, Evelyn Beatrice Hall, captured that ideal when she summarized his platform, often attributed as his quote,
"I disapprove what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it."
It was more than wit, it was defiance. Voltaire turned freedom of speech into a weapon against tyranny. Jean-Jacques Rousseau mistrusted everyone, even his friends. Hypersensitive, erratic, yet painfully sincere, he longed for authenticity in a world of masks. He believed man was born good. Society made him cruel.
Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains. True government must come from the consent of the governed.
His isolation birthed one of history's loudest calls for equality. The timid man's words would one day roar through revolutions. But not every voice was heard in the Enlightenment. Mary Wollstonecraft looked at the age of reason and asked why half of humanity was left out.
"I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves."
Her book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, demanded education and equality, arguing that reason belongs to all, not just the privileged or the male. While some expanded the meaning of reason, others began to question its limits. David Hume was philosophy's great skeptic and its warmest soul, a wit, a drinker, a storyteller, and one of Benjamin Franklin's dearest friends. They argued about truth, science, and God, usually over ale. Beneath the laughter, a radical thought simmered. What if even reason has limits?
You chase lightning, Ben. I chase certainty. And both, I think, are equally slippery.
His doubt wasn't destruction, it was discipline, the Enlightenment's conscience wrapped in a smile.
Reason alone cannot explain the world. We know only what experience teaches us.
Immanuel Kant was predictability itself, a philosopher of clockwork routine. Yet behind that precision was a party-loving intellect with a sharp wit and restless mind. He had read Hume, and it shook him to his core. If reason has limits, how can we know anything at all?
The Enlightenment is man's emergence from self-imposed ignorance. Dare to use your own reason.
Kant gave the movement its soul, not rebellion against faith, but liberation through thought. While philosophers reshaped Europe's mind, their ideas crossed oceans. In coffee houses, taverns, and embassies, thinkers and experimenters prepared to test those ideas in the real world, not with words alone, but with revolutions of reason and of freedom. Before Paris, before revolution, there was friendship. Two minds, one Scottish, one American, united by curiosity and courage.
David, I've shocked half of London with electricity, but your essays have shocked the other half with philosophy.
Then we're both dangerous men, my friend.
Their toast that night said it all.
To reason!
And to humanity. May both survive us.
By century's end, the Enlightenment burned brightest in Paris. In salons like this, ideas were currency, and Franklin, the visiting American, was its newest philosopher king.
Ah, Monsieur Franklin, tell us, has liberty truly found its spark?
It has, madame. Liberty, like electricity, must first shock the system before it lights the world.
Behold, the sages of two worlds, Voltaire and Franklin.
Your words, Monsieur Voltaire, crossed the ocean before our ships did.
And you, Monsieur Franklin, have proven that reason can defy kings. May the next generation carry it further, God and liberty.
In that moment, philosophy met revolution. Voltaire's pen had challenged tyranny. Franklin's diplomacy would help defeat it. When Franklin returned home, another thinker crossed the Atlantic. Thomas Jefferson, the quiet heir to the Enlightenment flame.
All men are created equal, endowed with certain unalienable rights.
From Voltaire's Paris to Jefferson's Virginia, the Enlightenment's light became the foundation of a new world. We live in an age that urges us to trust the science. But what happens when that science is shaped by those who profit from it? When questioning becomes dangerous and compliance is called virtue? The Enlightenment was never about rejecting authority. It was about holding it accountable. Hobbes warned that without order, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. But Locke demanded that even kings respect the natural rights of man. Montesquieu built balance to keep power in check. Voltaire fought censorship with wit sharper than any sword. Rousseau gave voice to the people, the governed, not just the governors. Hume questioned what we could ever truly know. Kant dared us to think for ourselves, sapere aude. And across the Atlantic, born of Enlightenment ideals, Franklin and Jefferson carried that courage into a new republic. The United States began as an experiment in freedom, imperfect, evolving, but ever reaching toward light. Institutions can be wrong, and sometimes they punish those who question. But progress does not come from obedience. It comes from courageous doubt. from daring to ask, why? How do we know? Who benefits? That is the spirit of the Enlightenment, and it must never die. Today we are looking at the age of absolutism, a period that spanned the 17th and 18th centuries, witnessed the rise of powerful monarchs who held absolute control over their realms. Among the most prominent of these rulers were Louis XIV of France and Charles V of the Habsburg Empire. Their reigns would not only define the politics of their nations, but also shape the course of European history. Louis XIV centralized power in the French state by diminishing the influence of the nobility. One of his most iconic actions was the construction of the Grand Palace of Versailles, a symbol of royal opulence and absolute authority. Versailles was not just a palace, it was a tool of control where Louis XIV could keep the nobility close, ensuring they had no room to challenge his rule.
Did you see the new wing? 100 rooms, all for his attendants.
Hush, dear. He keeps us close and dependent. That is his true genius.
Through strict control of the nobility, Louis XIV created a system where power emanated directly from the king. L'État, c'est moi, I am the state, was the famous declaration that encapsulated his absolute rule. The king alone made decisions regarding law, religion, and military affairs, consolidating all executive powers in his hands.
Majesty, the treasury runs low. Shall we consult the Parliament before raising taxes?
Consult! No, Colbert. The law is the king's will, and my will is final. If the state requires funds, the state shall have them. There is no power in France that does not flow from this throne. I am the state. L'État, c'est moi.
Louis XIV's reign was marked by frequent military campaigns, such as the War of Spanish Succession. While his wars expanded France's borders, they also drained the country's resources and left it in a precarious financial state. Despite this, Louis' dominance on the European stage remained unchallenged, and his reign became the embodiment of absolutist monarchy. Before Louis XIV's age of splendor, another ruler, Charles V of the Habsburgs, faced the impossible burden of holding Europe together. Charles, born in 1500, was crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 1519, inheriting a vast collection of territories stretching from Spain and the Netherlands to large parts of Central Europe. Charles V's reign marked the peak of Habsburg power. His empire was the most extensive in Europe at the time, but it was also one of the most fragmented. Unlike Louis XIV, whose central authority in France was unchallenged, Charles V ruled a patchwork of territories, many of which had distinct legal systems, cultures, and interests.
One day Vienna pleads for soldiers against the Turks. The next, German princes defy my authority. How can one man rule so many lands?
Majesty, the sun never sets on your empire.
Aye, and neither does my worry.
Charles V faced a constant challenge in managing his diverse empire. The growing power of the Ottoman Empire to the east, the Protestant Reformation in Germany, and the rise of France under Francis I all threatened his imperial control. But it was the challenge of reconciling the ambitions of his Spanish and Austrian branches of the Habsburg family that ultimately led to the empire's fragmentation. In 1556, after decades of struggle, Charles V made a historic decision. He abdicated, dividing his empire between his son, Philip II of Spain, and his brother, Ferdinand I, who took the title of Holy Roman Emperor. The Habsburg Empire, while still powerful, was never again as unified as it was under Charles V.
I have fought, prayed, and ruled too long. Let my brother Ferdinand and my son Philip share the burden. One head cannot bear two crowns.
Though their methods and challenges were different, both Louis XIV and Charles V left legacies that would resonate throughout Europe. Louis XIV's reign set the standard for absolute monarchy and the centralization of power in the hands of a single ruler, which would influence monarchs across the continent for generations to come. Meanwhile, Charles V's reign, with its complex web of territories and the eventual decline of the Habsburg Empire, illustrated the difficulties of governing a vast and diverse realm. His reign also marked the beginning of the rise of modern Europe, where religious, cultural, and political divisions would lead to the eventual development of nation-states. The age of absolutism was a time of great political and military upheaval, shaped by figures like Louis XIV and Charles V. Their struggles for power, their successes, and their failures not only defined their own countries, but set the stage for the modern world. In the end, their legacies would serve as both a lesson in the dangers of absolute power and a reminder of the complex nature of ruling over vast and diverse empires. In the age of absolutism, kings reached for the divine, believing themselves chosen to command not just nations, but destinies. Louis XIV ruled through splendor, Charles V through duty. One built a palace to contain his power, the other an empire too vast to hold. Their triumphs forged the idea of the modern state: order, armies, bureaucracy, pride. But their failures whispered a darker lesson, that power, when absolute, carries a cost no man can bear forever. Theirs was an age of grandeur and control, ours of freedom and complexity. Yet the question remains, how much power should one person or one government ever hold? Because the story of absolutism isn't just history, it's a mirror, and the reflection still stares back at us. January 30th, 1649. For the first time in history, a nation executed its own king. When the blade struck Charles I, divine right died with him. From that moment, no monarch would ever again stand entirely above the law, but freedom's price would prove heavier than anyone imagined. Charles I ruled by divine right. Believing his power came from God alone. He dismissed Parliament, raised taxes, and silenced opposition. Yet across England, voices rose in defiance. Merchants, Puritans, and commoners demanded that the king answer to the people.
Kings are not bound by men's will.
Then you will be bound by their swords.
Question: where did this crisis of power first erupt?
The English Civil War. It was king versus parliament. Charles believed in divine right. Parliament believed in shared power. Their biggest clash was over taxation.
Exactly. Parliament held the power of the purse. When Charles tried to rule without them for 11 years, tension turned into war.
England erupted into civil war. Royalists fought for the crown. Parliamentarians fought for liberty. Families were torn apart. Brother battled brother. And amid the chaos, one man rose to command the revolution. Oliver Cromwell began as a farmer and Puritan preacher, a man of conviction, not ambition, but war transformed him. His new model army fought with faith, discipline, and purpose. Cromwell believed he was chosen to cleanse England of corruption, both royal and sinful.
We fight not for riches or crowns, but for the soul of this nation.
Cromwell believed peace was impossible while Charles lived. He supported Pride's purge, removing moderates from Parliament, leaving the rump Parliament to try the king.
And I heard that Cromwell personally signed the death warrant. He was third of 59 signers.
In 1649, England tried its own king for treason, a crime once unthinkable.
I am the king. The law is in my breast.
The law is above even kings.
The execution of Charles I shattered the divine right of kings forever. The monarch was no longer sacred. He was accountable to the people. It was a revolution, not just in politics, but in the human mind. Cromwell abolished the monarchy and declared England a commonwealth, a republic under his godly rule. But what began as liberation became restriction. Cromwell's Puritan Parliament banned gambling, dancing, theater, sports. The man even banned Christmas.
Better a sober people in heaven than a merry one in hell.
For Cromwell, joy itself was temptation, and temptation was sin. England became a nation of order without laughter, faith without celebration. When a revolution silences music, the people soon grow deaf to its ideals.
This was the site of the Blackfriars Theatre, once alive with Shakespeare's plays. Cromwell's government shut it down.
Right, the Puritans banned all fun. Even Christmas was outlawed.
They declared December 25th a day of fasting instead of feasting. Soldiers patrolled the streets to confiscate holiday food. People rioted in protest. They missed their joy.
It's fascinating. The man who fought tyranny became a tyrant of morality.
Exactly. It shows that even revolutions can lose their soul when they forget humanity.
After Cromwell's death, England longed for light again. In 1660, they restored the monarchy under Charles II, the Merry Monarch. Theaters reopened, laughter returned, and Christmas once again filled the streets. Yet the people had learned a king could rule only with consent.
The Restoration brought back monarchy, but not absolutism. The lesson of Charles I still echoed. No ruler stood above Parliament.
But the conflict wasn't truly over until the next crisis, the Glorious Revolution of 1688.
When James II tried to reclaim absolute power and restore Catholic dominance, Parliament responded. They invited William of Orange and Mary, his Protestant wife, to rule. It was a revolution without blood, a victory of law over force. The English Bill of Rights transformed monarchy into partnership. No king could suspend laws, tax, or raise armies without Parliament's approval. Elections were to be free, speech in Parliament protected, and cruel punishments forbidden. The throne became constitutional, a symbol, not a command.
So this was the final settlement, a monarchy ruled by law?
Exactly. The Civil War proved a king could be removed, the Glorious Revolution proved he must be limited. Together, they built the foundation for modern democracy.
The English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution echoed far beyond Britain. Thinkers like John Locke wrote of natural rights, life, liberty, and property. His ideas crossed oceans, inspiring revolutions from America to France. From England's turmoil emerged the world's enduring blueprint for representative government. Oliver Cromwell destroyed tyranny, but in his zeal forgot joy. Charles I died for his defiance, Cromwell for his control. From both came a hard-earned truth. Liberty cannot live in chains, not of monarchy nor of moral fear.
Rebellion gave Britain its freedom, law gave it balance.
And the people, finally, found their voice.
History doesn't repeat, but it whispers. In the 1640s, the English people grew tired of a king who ignored their needs and disrespected their rights. They felt unheard, dismissed, and pushed to the edge. So, in a wave of fury, they did the unthinkable. They rose up, fought a war, and removed their king from power permanently. It was a revolution born from righteous anger, a promise to build a better, fairer nation. But the man who replaced the king wasn't what they expected. Oliver Cromwell, a military genius and a devout Puritan, stepped into the power vacuum. He promised virtue, discipline, and a godly society. What he delivered was absolute control. He believed he was saving the nation's soul, but his methods were harsh and uncompromising. Suddenly, the simple joys of life became crimes. He shut down the theaters, believing they were dens of sin. He banned public celebrations and festivals, even canceling Christmas. Taverns were shuttered and soldiers patrolled the streets, enforcing a rigid, joyless order. The vibrant culture of England was silenced, replaced by a gray, oppressive quiet. The people had traded a flawed king for a righteous dictator. This reveals a dangerous truth. Anger can unite a crowd, but it cannot build a nation. The enemy of your enemy is not always the friend you should trust. A shared grievance is a powerful spark, but it's a terrible foundation for a free society. The revolution had succeeded in tearing down the old system, but it failed to build something better in its place. Incredibly, Cromwell's rule became so suffocating that the people began to long for the very monarchy they had fought so hard to overthrow. After his death, they invited the executed king's son, Charles II, back to the throne. The streets that were once silent erupted in celebration. They had learned a bitter lesson. They didn't want another tyrant, but they didn't want a fanatical savior either. They wanted balance. They wanted a system where power was checked and liberty was protected. But England wasn't done learning. When James II tried to reclaim absolute power, the people refused to repeat their past mistakes. Parliament invited William and Mary to rule, not by divine right, but by consent. The Glorious Revolution and the English Bill of Rights finally achieved what decades of war could not: a government where the monarchy was limited, Parliament was supreme, and the rights of the people were protected. And that is the legacy of this era. Not the fury of revolution, but the wisdom to build a system where no ruler stands above the law. This hard-won wisdom helped spark the Enlightenment, inspiring thinkers like John Locke, whose ideas about government and individual rights would eventually cross the Atlantic and shape the founding principles of the United States. The story serves as a warning for today. When people feel unheard, when frustration boils over into fury, every society becomes vulnerable to a similar cycle. It's easy to be swept up in the promise of radical change, to rally behind a strong leader who promises to burn it all down. So be careful what you wish for. Revolutions always promise change, but it is wisdom, not anger, that decides whether that change leads to true freedom or just another kind of cage. The line between a hero and a tyrant can be dangerously thin. Thanks for watching. Revolutions don't stay still. Once the American colonies proved that a people could overthrow a king and build a nation on the idea of natural rights, the shockwaves raced across the Atlantic. Within a single generation, France erupted, Haiti rose in fire under Toussaint Louverture, and Latin America, led by figures like Simón Bolívar, fought to break centuries of Spanish rule. The question wasn't if revolution would spread, but how far. In 1776, the American colonists declared something radical. Governments exist to protect the people's rights, not a monarch's power. They built a republic, a constitution, and a government grounded in Enlightenment ideals. For the world, this wasn't philosophy anymore, it was proof.
All men are created equal, endowed with unalienable rights.
The document declared the nation's intent, but the country had not yet cast aside the cultural yoke of slavery that bound 500,000, nearly 1/5 of its people.
People across the Atlantic world whispered the same question. If the Americans can overthrow tyranny, why can't we?
In America, we saw people govern themselves, not by the will of a king, but by the consent of their citizens. It was as if a new world was being born before our eyes.
Inspired by the Declaration of Independence, French revolutionaries wrote their own, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The French watched the American colonies and saw something revolutionary. Popular sovereignty wasn't just theory anymore. A people actually governed themselves. Written rights proved that freedoms could be guaranteed on paper, not granted by a king. Equality under the law became a demand, not a dream. And above all, the success of the American Revolution deepened France's growing distrust of unchecked monarchy. If a distant colony could challenge a king, why couldn't France? The American Revolution struck France like lightning. Feudal privilege, centuries old, collapsed almost overnight. A king fell, and in his place rose a republic built on the promise of equality. French reformers wrote constitutions that echoed American ideals, popular sovereignty, rights of citizens, and government by consent. But France took liberalism farther and faster than anyone expected. The push for liberty spiraled into factional chaos. Chaos ignited terror, and terror paved the way for a new kind of ruler.
If rights belong to all, then the king's power belongs to none.
But the American and French revolutions ignited something even more explosive, a revolution among the enslaved. In Saint-Domingue, France's wealthiest colony, people of African descent heard France proclaim liberty and equality for all citizens. They understood the promise, they understood the hypocrisy, and they knew exactly what it meant for them.
If liberty is universal, then it must be ours.
And if France will not give it, we will take it.
From this fire rose Toussaint Louverture, a self-educated former slave with the discipline of a general and the vision of a statesman. Historians call him the Black Spartacus, the man who transformed a slave uprising into a full-scale revolution.
I was born a slave, but nature gave me the soul of a free man.
Like Spartacus, he fought an empire. Like Washington, he built order from chaos. Britain, Spain, even Napoleon all sent armies to crush Haiti.
This Louverture, he fights as if he knows our plans before we make them.
Liberty is our North Star. We follow it or perish.
Haiti became the first nation in history born from a successful slave revolt. Its constitution outlawed slavery forever.
No man here is a master. No man here is a slave. All are children of liberty.
The world trembled, especially slaveholding powers like the United States, France, and Great Britain, who feared that Haiti's revolution would spark the same flames of freedom at home. The fires of revolution kept spreading. If Louverture was the Black Spartacus, then Simón Bolívar became the George Washington of South America, a visionary who believed an entire continent could break its chains and stand as independent republics. As a young man, Bolívar traveled through Europe and witnessed the fall of monarchies firsthand. And although he never visited the United States, he studied its example closely, a functioning republic built on Enlightenment ideals of liberty, citizenship, and self-government.
Washington proved a nation can be born from principle, not bloodline.
When Napoleon toppled the Spanish king in 1808, Latin Americans saw their moment. With the royal authority shattered, the colonies realized they no longer owed obedience to a monarch who no longer ruled. The door to independence had finally opened.
We are not Spaniards, we are Americans, and we will be free.
Libertad.
Like Washington, Bolívar wanted more than victory. He wanted unity, a single grand republic that would bind the newly freed nations together, stretching from Colombia to Bolivia, strong enough to stand against empires old and new.
If we do not unite, we will perish separately.
In one of history's greatest military feats, Bolívar led his army across the freezing Andes Mountains, a South American echo of Washington crossing the Delaware, bold, impossible, and timed to strike when no enemy expected it.
Forward, a continent waits for its freedom.
But even Bolívar needed help. Driven into exile, he sailed to Haiti, the first free black republic, seeking aid for the liberation of South America. Haiti agreed, on one condition.
Abolish slavery wherever you win. And where we triumph, slavery shall fall.
And he kept his promise.
By 1830, the world had transformed. The American Revolution had set the spark, but in France, that spark became a wildfire. The French pushed Enlightenment ideals farther and faster than anyone imagined. The monarchy challenged the divine right of kings, once unquestioned, shattered. Louis XVI was overthrown and executed, the first European monarch to fall to a citizen-led revolution. His wife, Marie Antoinette, forever haunted by the false phrase, "let them eat cake," followed him to the guillotine. Feudal privileges ended in a single dramatic night, August 4th, 1789. Centuries of noble privileges, feudal dues, and church tithes collapsed. What had defined French society for generations vanished almost instantly. Constitutions inspired by the U.S. reformers looked across the Atlantic and saw a working model. Written rights, popular sovereignty, and a government bound by law rather than birthright. France embraced these principles and tried to build a republic of its own. A republic attempted, but forging a nation without a king proved far more volatile in France than in America. Political liberalism surged without restraint. Factions battled for control. The revolution spiraled into chaos. Chaos ignited the reign of terror, a moment when liberty's bright promise dimmed beneath fear, suspicion, and the blade of the guillotine. From the American Revolution, Haiti across the Caribbean, the promises of liberty echoed even louder. In France's richest colony, Saint-Domingue, enslaved men and women heard talk of universal rights. Rights that were said to belong to all people. They did not wait for permission. The enslaved rose up, demanding the freedom the revolution claimed to guarantee. Their struggle forced France to confront its own ideals, and for the first time in the modern world, slavery was abolished in a European colony. From this uprising emerged something the world had never seen, the first free black republic, Haiti. Born from fire, led by extraordinary figures like Toussaint Louverture, Haiti stood as living proof that liberty could break even the strongest chains, and the world, especially slave-holding nations, trembled. From the American Revolution, Latin America south of the Caribbean, the revolutionary spark leapt across an entire continent. For centuries, Spain had ruled its colonies through distant kings and rigid hierarchies, but when Americans proved a people could govern themselves, Latin America began to imagine a different future. Independence movements spread from Mexico to Argentina, led by visionaries like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín. Across mountains, jungles, and battlefields, they fought not only to defeat empire, but to build something new. As the wars of liberation unfolded, the blueprint of the United States became a model. Governments built on constitutions, citizenship instead of colonial status, republics replacing royal authority. By the 1820s, the old imperial order had crumbled. A new principle, national sovereignty, took hold. Nations would choose their own destinies, and the map of the Americas would never be the same again. The American Revolution lit the spark, but each revolution shaped its own destiny. America proved that ordinary people could defy a king. France took that spark and demanded equality. Haiti pushed it farther still, insisting that freedom must belong to everyone. And Bolívar dreamed of an entire continent rising together in liberty. Different lands, different battles, different visions of what freedom could be, but all were born from a single revolutionary idea that people, not kings, not empires, should decide their own destiny. The spark began in America. The fire reshaped the world. Power never disappears, it merely changes hands. When the French Revolution shattered the absolute monarchies of Europe, a vast political vacuum opened. From that chaos rose one extraordinary general, a man whose genius and ambition would not only command armies, but redesign the political landscape of an entire continent. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and when his empire finally collapsed, Europe's rulers gathered in Vienna, determined to rebuild what he had torn apart. The true conflict was never just fought on the battlefield, but in the struggle to define Europe's future, revolution versus restoration. Napoleon began as a champion of the revolution, yet soon became its imperial master. When he crowned himself, he embodied a new idea, power earned through merit, not bestowed by divine right. Where his armies marched, the old order crumbled. Feudal privileges were swept aside. Ancient laws were replaced by the Napoleonic Code, a modern legal system built on equality before the law, protection of property, and advancement based on ability.
I found the crown of France lying in the gutter. I picked it up with the tip of my sword.
For millions across Europe, this was a shock. Societies governed for centuries by hereditary privilege suddenly faced a world where talent mattered more than birth.
I reward ability, not titles.
But Napoleon's greatest legacy was one he never intended: nationalism. As he conquered territories, he unknowingly awakened a sense of shared identity among the people he ruled. Italians, Germans, Spaniards all began to imagine themselves as nations capable of governing their own destinies. Yet even brilliance has limits. In 1812, the Russian winter consumed his grand army. Europe united against him, and after Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon fell for the last time, leaving behind a continent transformed and deeply unstable. After 20 years of war, Europe needed order. The great powers, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, and even France, met in Vienna to rebuild the continent. At the center stood Clemens von Metternich, a master diplomat and fierce defender of the old order.
Our task is not to seize trophies, but to restore the world to peaceful habits.
Metternich sought to reverse the revolutionary tide.
Revolutions spread like fire. We must smother the embers and protect the thrones.
The Congress restored overthrown monarchs through the principle of legitimacy, redrew the map of Europe to create a balance of power, and built the Concert of Europe, a system to preserve stability and suppress liberal and nationalist uprisings. Vienna was not merely diplomacy, but it was diplomacy wrapped in spectacle.
The Congress of Vienna does not walk, it dances.
Censorship tightened. Political speech was restricted. Revolutions were crushed before they could grow. Yet remarkably, the system worked. From 1815 until the outbreak of World War I, Europe avoided any major continent-wide war. Napoleon and the Congress of Vienna shaped the modern world through their opposition. Napoleon's conquests planted the seeds of self-rule, equality before the law, and national identity. Vienna tried to bury those ideas, restoring monarchs and tightening conservative control. But Metternich could only redraw borders. He could not erase the ideals Napoleon had unleashed. Beneath Vienna's polished surface, nationalism and liberalism simmered. Within a few decades, they erupted in the revolutions of 1848. Italy unified, Germany rose under Prussian leadership, and the great multi-ethnic empires, Austria and the Ottomans, began to crack under the weight of the very identities Napoleon had awakened. Europe entered a long peace, but it was an uneasy peace, built atop shifting ground, destined to fracture. Napoleon reshaped Europe through conquest and law. Vienna reshaped it through diplomacy and control. Between these two forces, the foundations of the modern political world were laid. Their shared legacy is a Europe forever caught between tradition and transformation, calm on the surface, yet never truly settled. Histoscript, where standards become stories. History remembers Napoleon through battles, borders, and laws, but some of the most powerful judgments of him were not written in books. They were written in music. From the concert halls of Vienna to the Orthodox churches of Moscow, composers used symphonies, marches, and even cannons to say exactly what they believed Napoleon represented. To some, he was a hero. To others, a tyrant. To Russia, the Antichrist. If Vienna tried to shape the political memory of Napoleon, music tried to shape the emotional one. And sometimes the emotional memory is the one that lasts. This is the story of Napoleon, told by the music he inspired. Before Napoleon crowned himself emperor, he was admired across Europe as the great hope of the Enlightenment, a liberator, a breaker of chains, the enemy of monarchy. No one believed this more deeply than Ludwig van Beethoven. In 1803, Beethoven wrote a symphony unlike any ever composed, monumental, heroic, revolutionary. He dedicated it to Napoleon, the man he believed would remake Europe in the image of freedom. The first movement charges forward with unstoppable energy. The funeral march mourns the death of tyranny, and the finale erupts with triumphant hope. This was Beethoven's musical tribute to a world without kings. But then, Napoleon crowned himself emperor. Beethoven's assistant wrote that the composer tore the title page in rage, shouting, "Now he will trample the rights of man." In that moment, Napoleon changed in Beethoven's eyes from hero to betrayer of the revolution. Years later, Beethoven composed another piece about Napoleon, but this one was no tribute. Wellington's Victory, written in 1813, celebrated Napoleon's defeat in Spain. Instead of heroic themes, Beethoven filled the music with theatrical battle sounds, marching drums, musket fire, and clashing orchestras. This was not admiration, this was mockery, a musical victory parade celebrating Napoleon's downfall. Beethoven had come full circle. Napoleon the Liberator had become Napoleon the Tyrant. But nowhere was Napoleon judged more harshly than in Russia. In 1812, as French forces burned villages, destroyed churches, and marched on Moscow, Russians searched for ways to explain such devastation. In Tolstoy's War and Peace, characters describe Napoleon not simply as a conqueror, but as the Antichrist, a man of overwhelming ego who threatened the spiritual order of the world. Tolstoy portrays ordinary Russians who saw Napoleon as a godless force, a living omen of apocalypse, the embodiment of pride before destruction. Decades later, Tchaikovsky transformed this same national memory into one of the most dramatic musical works ever written, the 1812 Overture. It begins with a Russian Orthodox hymn, a plea for divine protection. Then suddenly, the French national anthem, La Marseillaise, intrudes like an invading army. The two themes clash violently. Cannons explode, the music collapses into chaos. Finally, the Russian hymn rises again, joined by thunderous church bells that crush the French melody beneath them. This is not just musical storytelling, it is spiritual triumph. In sound, Tchaikovsky expresses what Tolstoy wrote in words. Napoleon was the force Russia had to overcome, not only militarily, but morally. To Russia, he was not the hero of liberty. He was a proud conqueror who defied God and fell. Two composers, two nations, three Napoleons. To early Beethoven, he was a heroic liberator. To later Beethoven, he became a fallen tyrant. To Tchaikovsky and to Tolstoy, he was a destructive force, a threat to the soul of Russia itself. Napoleon's legacy is not just political, it is emotional. It is cultural. It echoes in symphonies, overtures, and national memory. Music reveals a deeper truth. The world didn't just fight Napoleon, it argued about him. Napoleon reshaped Europe through force. Music reshaped him through memory. Whether hero or monster, savior or antichrist, Napoleon inspired some of the greatest composers in history to judge him, through sound, through emotion, through art. Long after the battles have faded, the music still plays. Napoleon lost on the battlefield, but in a strange way he won in history. Europe spent decades trying to undo him, restoring kings, silencing reformers, and returning to the old order. But the world didn't stay restored. In the long run, Europe moved toward the ideas Napoleon championed, not away from them. Merit over birthright, law over privilege, nations shaped by citizens, not dynasties. The very monarchies that feared his reforms eventually adopted them, and the world that condemned him for challenging tradition now takes those challenges for granted. Maybe Napoleon was ahead of his time. Maybe the Europe he imagined, a Europe driven by talent, ambition, and national identity, didn't appear in 1815, but in 1848, in 1871, and in the centuries that followed. Today, we expect opportunities to be earned, not inherited. We expect laws to apply to everyone. We expect nations to be defined by people, not by rulers. In the end, the kings beat Napoleon, but his ideas beat the kings. And that's why his story still matters, because the world we live in looks far more like Napoleon's blueprint than the world that tried to erase him.
Thanks for watching Histoscript. If you learned something new today, or just love the hidden side of history, give this video a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story your textbook skipped. History isn't just dates, it's secrets, myths, and the strange truths behind it all. Stay curious. Stay tuned.